Good morning, church family. I'd like to welcome you to the Sunday morning Bible class here at the Broad Street Church of Christ. I don't know about your week, but I had a really busy week this coming up week. How about you? Looks like I see a lot of heads going up and down. For the last 4 months, we've been seeking to answer the question, does archaeology support the Bible? I got an echo. Last week in Genesis chapter 20, we noted that Abraham moved from Mamre near Hebron south to Gerar. We reviewed the biblical and archaeological histories of Gerar and found them to be consistent with each other. We also noted that Abraham pawned his wife Sarah off as his sister to the ruler of Gerar, just as he had done with the Pharaoh of Egypt in Genesis chapter 12, and with similar results. Now, Abraham and Sarah have been asked to leave Gerar, but they had permission to go anywhere in the Philistine-controlled region. And this is where Genesis chapter 20 ends, so we'll begin this week with Genesis chapter 21. Oh. Hey, Scott, this is week 15. I need week 16. All right, pause. Thank you. I'll keep going while Scott loads up this week's slides. In chapter 21, Isaac is born. Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away. And that brings us to verse 22. I'm going to read verses 22 to 30 so I can set the stage for our discussions of verse 31. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now, swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown you. Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. And that leads us into verse 31, which is on the screen. Thanks, Scott. So that place was called Beersheba because the 2 men swore an oath there. So we now have a new place name of Beersheba. Note that Genesis chapter 21 does not refer to Beersheba as the city of Beersheba, but as a place. In fact, the text suggests that the place didn't even have a name until Abraham gave it one. This is significant from an archaeological perspective. We don't expect to find evidence of a city or a town or even a village at the time of Abraham. The name Beersheba is a combination of 2 words, Be'er, which means well, and Sheba, actually in the Hebrews pronounce it Shiva with a V, which can either mean oath or 7. So the combination of the 2 can mean either well of oath or well of 7. Both can apply here. The well of 7 can refer to the 7 sheep that Abraham paid to secure the well in chapter 21. The well of oath can refer to the oath Abraham made with Abimelech in Genesis chapter 1, or to the oath made by Isaac and Abimelech in Beersheba in Genesis chapter 26, verse 31. Beersheba is a well-known archaeological site in southern Israel. This is a satellite image of the Israeli-Egyptian border that I showed you last week. Hebron, where Abraham and Sarah came from, is here, up in the Judean mountains. Kadesh, which we talked about several weeks ago, is out here. The Israeli border is right about here. The city of Gerar, is right here. This is a well-watered plain. There's a lot of streams that go from the mountains out to the ocean. And Beersheba is right here. The mountains come right here. So Beersheba is really close to the mountains. It's still part of this, what's called the Gerar Valley. It's right on the eastern edge of that valley. Beersheba is known to archaeologists as Tel Beersheba. The Tel is located 2.5 miles east from the modern city of Beersheba. It's located 26 miles southeast of Tel Harar, where Gerar is located, and about 30 miles southwest of Hebron. So when I'm through, this slide will become a biblical history of Beersheba. Beersheba is mentioned 34 times in the Bible. It's mentioned 5 times in Genesis chapter 21 in connection with the agreement between Abraham and Abimelech over a well of water that Abraham had dug. Beersheba received its name as a result of the oath between these two men. Genesis chapter 1 tells us that at this time Beersheba was a place and not a city or a town or a village. Verse 33 tells us that Abraham planted a tree there to help mark the spot. Beersheba is mentioned 2 more times in Genesis chapter 26 in connection with the agreement between Isaac, Abraham's son, and Abimelech over wells of water. Afterward, Isaac builds an altar there. Beersheba is mentioned once in Genesis chapter 28 as Jacob leaves Isaac to go to Haran to obtain a wife. Beersheba is also mentioned twice in Genesis chapter 46 in connection with Jacob's travels to Egypt with his family. Jacob offers a sacrifice at the altar there and is reassured by God that it is safe for him to go to Egypt. Beersheba is mentioned twice in the book of Joshua. In chapter 15, Beersheba is listed as one of the areas first allotted to the tribe of Judah. However, in chapter 29, it's reassigned to the tribe of Simeon after the Israeli conquest of Canaan. Beersheba is also mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 28, as part of the territory allotted to the tribe of Simeon. At this time, Beersheba is described as a village and not as a city. Beersheba is mentioned once in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 2. The last judge and first prophet, Samuel, sends his 2 sons to Beersheba to serve as judges. The sons accepted bribes and perverted justice. As a result, the elders asked God to appoint a king. At this point, Beersheba is not described as a city. Although Beersheba is not specifically mentioned, in 1 Samuel chapters 14 and 15, King Saul conducts a military campaign against the Amalekites in the area just south of Beersheba, from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. During the time of King David, the phrase "from Dan to Beersheba" is used 9 times in the books of Judges, 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles to describe the land of the kingdom of Israel at the time of David. Also, Beersheba is mentioned once in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 7, in connection with the census that King David ordered. Although Beersheba is not specifically mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 17 through 19, King Solomon fortifies various towns and cities, including those in the southern desert. Beersheba appears to have been one of those cities. The first time Beersheba is mentioned as a city is in 1 Kings chapter 4 during the time of King Solomon. Beersheba is mentioned 5 times in the book of 1 and 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles in connection with the various kings of Judah and Israel during the divided monarchy period. Also, Beersheba is mentioned in Amos chapters 5 and 8 in association with idol worship during the divided monarchy period. Beersheba is mentioned twice in Nehemiah chapter 11 in connection with the tribe of Judah's returnees from exile in Babylon going to Beersheba and other Judean towns. The books of Obadiah, Ezekiel, and Amos prophesies doom to the Edomites who occupy the Judean cities like Beersheba during the Babylonian exile. So the Judean returnees would have to contend with the Edomites upon their return. So this slide, when I'm done, will list all of the archaeological studies which were conducted at Tel Beersheba. Between 1969 and 1975, Israeli archaeologists Yohan Aroni from the Tel Aviv University conducted annual excavations at Tel Beersheba. His excavations revealed a Judges-era village of about 100 to 140 occupants. Aroni also found a small but exceptionally planned and well-constructed city dating back to the United Monarchy period. The city dating to this period was small, about 2.5 acres in size. In a paper published in 1980 in the Biblical Archaeological Review, Israeli archaeologist Zeev Herzog proposed that the Judges-era village was built up to a fortress by King Saul during his war with the Amalekites described in 1 Samuel chapter 15. However, most archaeologists believe that the city was fortified by King Solomon as described in 1 Kings chapter 9. Although the city was small, its defenses were described as of unusual strength. Findings from the divided monarchy era include a 4-chambered gate, a city square, a governor's palace, 3 large storehouses with hundreds of pottery vessels, and rows of horse stables. Sounds like a fortress. Another key discovery included a pagan altar dating to the 8th century BC, or the time of the divided monarchy. The altar was found dismantled. Many have linked the dismantling of the altar to the religious reforms of King Hezekiah mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 18 and 2 Chronicles chapter 31. Also found was a destruction layer dating to 670 BC. This appears to correlate with the earthquake mentioned in Amos chapter 1 verse 1 and Zechariah chapter 14 verse 5 that occurred during the reigns of Jeroboam II of Israel and Uzziah of Judea. Historians, archaeologists, and geologists have pinpointed the date of this earthquake to 760 BC. Archaeological evidence of this earthquake can be found all over the archaeological sites in Israel, including Hazar, Lachish, Acre, Megiddo, Dan, Gezer, En-Gedi, and many others. A second destruction layer has been found dating to about 701 BC. This destruction layer is believed to be the result of the military campaign of the Assyrian king Sennacherib of 701 BC, which is described in the books of 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and Isaiah. The city appears to have been abandoned for at least 100 years after this destruction. After Aroni's untimely death in 1976, Israeli archaeologist Zeev Herzog, also from the Tel Aviv University, conducted one more season of excavations. His excavations in 1976 focused on several wells in and around the city dating to the late Judges period. I didn't have this in my notes, but what he was looking for were the wells of Abraham and Isaac. He didn't find them. Between 1990 and 1995, Herzog returned to Tel Beersheba and conducted excavations at the site. These excavations focused on the complex underground water system, which appears to have been designed to sustain the city during a military siege campaign. This system used secret tunnels, collected running water from the Hebron River during the winter when it was at flood stage, into hidden underground reservoirs located under the city. These reservoirs could hold up to 185,000 gallons of water. This water system dates to about the 8th century, or the time of King Hezekiah of the divided monarchy period. In 2019, the Israeli Antiquities Authority announced the discoveries of 2 additional settlements at Tel Beersheba. The first was a settlement of the post-Babylonian exile returnees to Beersheba. This settlement appears to have lasted until the Second Temple period. The second was a Roman-era settlement dating to the reign of King Herod, which lasted until the first Jewish revolt of 68 AD. After the revolt, the settlement was fortified and used by the Romans for a few centuries. This fortress was later used by the Arabs during the early Islamic period and again by the Ottoman Turks during World War I. This slide, when I'm finished, will be a comparison of the biblical history and the archaeological findings for Tel Beersheba. The Bible, in Genesis chapter 21, tells us that Beersheba was just an unnamed place at the time of Abraham. Abraham gave the place a name and planted a tree there to mark the location. Archaeology confirms that there was no settlement at Beersheba at the time of Abraham. The Bible, in the book of Joshua, mentions Beersheba as part of the land allotment first to the tribe of Judah and then to the tribe of Simeon. Beersheba is described at this time as a village and not as a city. Archaeology has found no evidence of a settlement dating to the Israeli conquest at Tel Beersheba. The conquest-era site of Beersheba may be located at another yet unidentified location, or alternatively, Nathan Steinmeier proposes that given that the Judges-era site, which we'll talk about next, was and I quote, was constructed atop natural bedrock, and it may be that the city's construction eradicated any earlier remains, unquote, from the conquest-era site. The Bible, in the book of Samuel, tells us that Samuel sent 2 of his sons to Beersheba to serve as judges. Therefore, Beersheba must have been a permanent settlement at this time to serve as a base of operations for judges. Archaeology tells us that at the end of the Judges era, there was a small settlement at Tel Beersheba with a population reaching of around 100 to 140 people. The Bible mentions the phrase "from Dan to Beersheba" 9 times in the books of Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 1 and 2 Chronicles. The first time that the word city is used to describe Beersheba is in 1 Kings chapter 4 during the time of King Solomon. Archaeology tells us that during the United Monarchy period, Tel Beersheba reached its apex and was an exceptionally planned and well-constructed fortified city. The Bible mentions Beersheba 5 times in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings and 2nd Chronicles in association with various kings of Judah and Israel during the divided monarchy era. Beersheba is mentioned in Amos chapter 5 and 8 in association with idol worship during the divided monarchy period. Archaeology tells us that Beersheba was a fortified city during the divided monarchy period. In addition, a pagan altar was discovered, dismantled, and used in the construction of the fortifications of Beersheba. Since this altar was made with carved stones, it is unlikely to have been from Jewish origin. You may recall that God had told Moses that when they built an altar, used uncut stones. And so a Jewish altar would not have had carved stones. And this altar particularly had carved stones. The altar also bared a carved line which depicts a snake, which also would not have been of Jewish origin. The altar has been reassembled and is now in the Israeli Museum. It is believed that the temple was likely disassembled during the reforms of King Hezekiah of Judea, as described in 2 Kings chapter 18 and 2 Chronicles chapters 29 through 31. Archaeology also tells us that the city was destroyed in the military campaign of Assyrian king Sennacherib, as described in 2 Kings chapter 18, and was subsequently abandoned for at least 100 years. The Bible in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 11, tells us that some of Judea's repatriates from exile in Babylon returned to Beersheba. The books of Obadiah, Ezekiel, and Amos tell us that the cities in Judea were occupied by the Edomites at the time that the Judeans returned from exile. Archaeology tells us that a Jewish reoccupation did occur as described by Nehemiah, and that this occupation continued through the Roman period up to the Jewish revolt of 70 AD, when Beersheba became a Roman military outpost. So in summary, archaeology supports most of the Bible's claims regarding Beersheba. Although archaeology does not support the occupation of Tel Beersheba at the time of the Israeli conquest of Canaan, it doesn't refute it either. The conquest era Beersheba may either be at a different yet unidentified location, or the carefully planned city planners and builders of the Iron Age city removed the remains of the older village to lay out and build the new city. Any questions about Beersheba? Okay. So after the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and his entourage returned to Gerar. Abraham plants a tamarisk tree at Beersheba to mark its location. Chapter 21 ends by saying that Abraham stays in the land of the Philistines for a long time. And that brings us to chapter 22, and we'll begin with verse 2. Then God said, I misspelled that. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Notice the phrase region of Moriah. It does not say Mount Moriah. Nevertheless, Moriah is mentioned twice in the Bible. Here in Genesis chapter 22, verse 2, the region of Moriah is mentioned. In 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1, Mount Moriah is mentioned as the place where Solomon's temple was built. Jewish tradition has interpreted these two mentions of Moriah as being in the same place. For many years, I questioned this interpretation. Mount Moriah is located near Mount Zion, where Salem of Melchizedek is located. Did Abraham almost sacrifice his son Isaac in sight of the city of Salem? Well, I didn't think so, and I believe that Abraham's sacrifice location had to be somewhere else. This is the best topographical map I could find of the area around Jerusalem without all the construction on it. This is at about the time of King David, and I couldn't find a map of at the time of Salem dated to Melchizedek. So I use this map to help illustrate both my problem and the solution. Let's first look at the problem. Mount Moriah, where Solomon built the temple and where Jewish scholars believe Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac, is located right here. This whole bluish area here is the peak, if you will, or the hill or hilltop. The peak of the hill is right where the temple is located. Mount Zion, where Melchizedek Salem was located at the time, is here. Be aware that the Bible initially pinpoints Zion to that hilltop, right here. But over time, as Jerusalem it grows, the Bible uses the term Zion to reflect the entire city of Jerusalem, even though it outgrows Mount Zion. And later, the Bible uses the term Zion to refer to all of the land of Israel. The peak on Mount Moriah is about 2 football fields north of the peak of Mount Zion, about 600 yards. Mount Moriah was originally a few hundred feet taller than Mount Zion before all the construction took place. I originally believed that any human sacrifice being conducted on Mount Moriah would be visible to a city on Mount Zion. So that was the problem. Now for the possible solution. Before we discuss the possible solution, I need to tell you about some recent archaeological findings from Jerusalem. Israeli archaeologists Kathleen Kenyon, Eli Shukran, and Ronnie Wright believe that they have found the city walls dating to the time frame of Salem of Melchizedek. They unearthed walls, towers, tunnels, and a pool relating to the first fortifications located in the lower city of David near the Gihon Spring. These structures were dated to the time frame of Melchizedek and Abraham based on the pottery found, the archaeological style, and the stratigraphy. The city of Salem appears to have been about 12 acres in size and had a population of about 500 people. So we're back to this map, only this time I've modified it. This red line here, is kind of in the shape of a square, is the location of the ancient city of Salem on top of Mount Zion at the time of Abraham and Melchizedek, according to the archaeologists. The distance between Salem and Mount Moriah is again about 2 football field lengths. The area just above Salem, did I say Salem? I did. Okay, above Salem is this area right in here. Used to be a valley, but it was filled in at the time of Solomon so that he could help build the temple about 1,800 years later. This pink area, I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting, it goes all the way down to here. That is the city wall of the city of Jebus just before the Israeli conquest, and it represents the city of David about 400 years later. For reference purposes, I've added this blue line here to represent the city walls of the city of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. So you can see how the city of Jerusalem had expanded. After David's time, the city was here. In Solomon's time, it became all of this. And by the time Jesus came around, it was all of this. And today, it's off the map on in all directions. So, if Abraham approaches Mount Zion, coming from the south, from this valley, from the north side here, he could have easily conducted a sacrifice on Mount Moriah out of sight of line of the small fortified city of Salem, located on Mount Zion. The close proximity of Salem to Mount Moriah may also help explain the availability of a nearby ram for the sacrifice. You know, the ram having escaped Salem and exploring the mountain. Any questions there? No? So after God stops Abraham from sacrificing Isaac and provides him with a ram for the sacrifice, God reaffirms his covenant with Abraham. Then Abraham and his entourage returned to Beersheba, about 50 miles to the south. The Bible says he stayed there for a while. Abraham is then informed that his brother Nahor, who stayed back near Haran in modern-day Turkey, has many sons. The Bible states that one of these sons, Bethuel, has a daughter named Rebekah. And that concludes chapter 22. Chapter 23 begins with the death of Sarah at age 127 at Hebron. The Bible says that Abraham went to mourn for Sarah. That implies to me that he was at Beersheba, Sarah was at Hebron, and he went to Hebron to mourn. He purchases the cave of Machpelah, as we discussed in week 10, and he buries Sarah in the cave, and that ends chapter 23. Chapter 24 begins with Abraham sending his servant to his brother Nahor's town to find Isaac a wife. And that brings us then to verse 10. Pardon me. Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He sent out for Aram, Naharayim, and made his way to the town of Nahor. Aram Naharaim is a Hebrew phrase which means between the two rivers. This has exactly the same meaning as the Greek word Mesopotamia. Virtually all English translations use either the Hebrew or the Greek phrase, and many of them have a footnote with whichever phrase they didn't use in the translation. Some translations also include the word northwest because of the inclusion of the town of Nahor in the text. The town of Nahor is widely identified with the ancient city of Haran, located in the southwest modern-day Turkey. We talked about Haran in week 5. This is the place where Abraham's father, Terah, died. Yeah, that's what I just read. Abraham's servant arrives at a well outside the town of Nahor. He prays that whichever young woman offers to water his camels would be the one chosen by God to be Isaac's wife. Rebekah, who is mentioned in chapter 22, is the one who offers to water his camels. The servant then tells Rebekah of his mission and his answered prayer. He goes home with her to her household and tells the household of his mission. They all agree that Rebekah should go with him. Rebekah does go with the servant, and as the camels approach Isaac, we come to verse 62. Now Isaac had come from Bir Laharoi, for he was living in the Negev. So verse 62 now gives us a new place called Bir Laharoi. Bir Laharoi is mentioned 3 times in the Bible. The first mention is in Genesis 16:4 in relation to Hagar running away from Sarah after Abraham made her pregnant. She called the place Bir Laharoi, which means well of the living one who sees me. Verse 14 states that it lies between Kadesh and Bered. The second mention is the one here in Genesis chapter 24, verse 62. The third mention is in Genesis chapter 5, verse 11, which states that Bir Laharoi is where Isaac stayed a while after Abraham died. Archaeologists know where Kadesh is, but there's a lot of disagreement as to the locations of Bir Laharoi and Bered. So we will move on. So Isaac and Rebekah meet in the field near Bir Laharoi. The servant tells Isaac what Abram had asked him to do and what he had done. Let me pause there for a second. Something I didn't put in my notes, but which struck me. When Abraham talks to his servant about going and getting Isaac a wife from his relatives, he pleads with them several times, whatever you do, don't take Isaac with you. It's like he's afraid that if Isaac goes back to Haran, he'll never come back. And so Isaac, it appears that Isaac may not have even known that the servant went on this trip. The servant tells Isaac what Abraham asked him to do and what he had done. Isaac marries Rebekah, and chapter 24 ends with the statement, "And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death." Chapter 25 begins with Abraham taking a second wife named Keturah. Keturah bears him 6 sons. Abraham dies at 175. His sons Isaac and Ishmael bury him in the cave of Machpelah, where Sarah was buried. The Bible then says that Isaac lived near Bir Laharoi. Chapter 25 goes on to list the 12 sons of Ishmael, and then states that his descendants lived from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. Ishmael dies at age 137. Chapter 25 then goes on to tell the birth of Isaac's twin sons Esau and Jacob. The 2 boys grow up. Chapter 25 ends with Esau giving up his birthright to Jacob for some bread and a bowl of lentil stew. There are no place names in chapter 25 that we haven't already covered. And so we will pause there. Any questions? It appears that either I was crystal clear or I've completely stumped you. Thank you. Okay, let's get ready for our worship service.